is hosted by the Atlantic Council's Iran Strategy Project. As I mentioned, it's new. They're looking to focus on the role of women, youth in this ongoing protest movement in Iran. And throughout the conversation, we'd love if you could hashtag AC Iran for Atlantic Council Iran Project. And we've got some incredible guests, and I just want to go ahead and introduce who we're bringing onto the stage today, because you guys know them. They're such experts and such smart people on this topic. I also want to say one thing before I introduce everyone. We are watching the situation at Georgetown University, which is a big democracy conference on Iran. We're going to get an update on kind of what's happening there. But I just want to introduce who we will have joining us today. We're going to have Holly Dagres, a non-resident senior fellow and editor of the Iran Source and MENA Source publication at the Atlantic Council. She puts together a great newsletter looking at the situation there. I hope you'll consider going to Holly. Holly, maybe you can tweet out the newsletter later so folks can subscribe. We're also joined by Dr. Ladan Boroumand, a historian and co-founder of the Abdurrahman Boroumand Center. Ladan, you're going to have to correct me because I don't think I pronounced that correctly, but I'll get you a chance to do that. And then we're also joined by Marjan Keypour, the founder and director of the Alliance for Rights of All Minorities. So I want to kind of kick it off with Dr. Ladan. Ladan, if you are able to unmute yourself and hit the unmute button, I want to sort of kick it off first with what we are seeing at Georgetown University that's being live streamed right now. This was a planned conference on the future of democracy of Iran. Tell us a little bit about it, and is this a historic moment?
I believe it is, just be it for the variety of people who have gathered together to create this council of solidarity with the Iranian, the Women Life Freedom Revolution. And this is really a historic moment because here we have a man who represents history, basically, which is the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, sitting next to a former autonomist Kurdish communist, sitting to a woman who used to be part of the regime, a journalist within the regime, who since then has turned to a very active dissident pro-women activist, Masih Alinejad. And then you have this, our Nobel Peace Prize, Shirin Ebadi, who has represented a tradition of 25 years of human rights activism, both within and outside Iran. And our celebrities and actors and sports people. So basically, it gives us an interesting image of the Iranian society now in somehow the reflection of the Iranian society in the diaspora. And they are all referring to democracy, secularism, pluralism, the necessity of acknowledging ethnic rights, minority rights, women rights, gender discrimination, gender rights, LGTB rights. So I think it's not only historic within our own society, but I think also it's historic if you put it in the context of the larger Middle East and a society with Islamic background. Let's put it that way. I think it's very important. It's an important step forward, and it will show that there is a symbiotic relationship between outside and inside Iran. And we can talk about that because I think it's an important topic for very long time. The Islamic Republic, and also in the perception of in the West and outside the world, the diaspora was something isolated, separated from the real thing that is inside Iran. But now we will see that thanks to the technological revolution, the virtual space, all these separation are blurred, and there are really symbiotic relationship between outside and inside, physical public space and virtual public space. And I'm stopping here, and then I hope we can continue the conversation after my other colleagues.
Absolutely, Ladan. I want to bring you back. I want to bring Holly into the conversation because you were talking a little bit about inside and outside Iran. Holly is with the Atlantic Council and has been watching. I'm so sorry, guys. That's my loud dog. Holly has been watching the social media movement. Holly, talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing. The images, obviously, that we have been able to see in Iran have been because of social media. Can you give us a sense of this moment right now and maybe the momentum of what you're seeing?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I actually want to hit home on a couple of points that I thought were really insightful from today's event. Granted, it's still ongoing as we speak, but the first 45 minutes that I was able to tune in, there were a couple of comments made that really stood out to me. For instance, Nobel laureate Shirin Ebadi said, people ask what happens if this regime goes, and she asked the question, well, what happens if this regime remains? And I think that was a really solid point because everybody keeps worrying about the future. And when we look at the present situation, especially not just on the ground in the country, but the impact the Islamic Republic has had on the international community and what it's done over the years, including its involvement in the current Ukraine war, is really something to think about. Another thing, we heard from journalists and women's rights activist Masih Ali Najad bring up that, this regime is dead. It's gone. It's dead in the people's hearts. And yes, the regime is in power. The Islamic Republic's in power, but it's very true. People are fed up. They do not want this regime. They're calling for a referendum. And so I think that was a really good point. And finally, we heard from former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. He brought up that a lot of people are very skeptical about what's happening in the country, that this protest movement has quieted down, and therefore whatever momentum was there is gone. And he brought up a really good point that when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, did that mean that the civil rights movement was dead? No. And so I really thought those comments resonated with me, at least. And I think they really expressed what a lot of people are feeling right now. In terms of what's happening on the ground in social media, first I need to say that social media is the only way for Iranians to have their voices heard by the world. And social media has been integral in getting out what's happening in the country, not just during these current ongoing protests, but in the past. Iranians use social media to hold their government accountable through hashtags. When they're posting videos of security forces brutally cracking down on protesters, it's not just to say, hey, this is what's happening here, but actually for human rights organizations and the international community to document what's happening in their country. And I would say since the 2009 post-election protests known as the Green Movement, the security apparatus of the Islamic Republic has recognized that social media and internet is a national security threat. This is why 35% of the world's most popular websites are blocked, and why they've been able to not just slow the internet to a slow-like pace, but make it almost impossible for Iranians to get online without using VPNs. And more importantly, as we saw during the bloody 2019 protests known in the month of Aban, or in the Iranian calendar month of Aban, they actually use an internet shutdown as a cover to brutally kill at least 1,500 people. And so the authorities have recognized that controlling the internet means you're controlling the protest movement. And actually, one of the concerning things we've seen over the past year is that they've actually been talking about a bill, an so-called internet protection bill. And the funny thing is, when it was discussed in Parliament in the summer of 2021, when Iranians caught wind of what was happening, they were outraged, so much so that they decided that they were at least publicly, not going to decide to pass this bill, but actually implement it without it becoming a law. And so we've seen Iranians are struggling to get online now with VPNs, and we've seen a lot of other elements as well happen. I think one of the other things I want to bring up is social media, and actually a lot of the cases, protesters being arrested. We've been seeing that a lot of the sentences that are being handed out to protesters actually pertain to social media. So they will release people and they will say that for the next year, you're going to have to put pro-Islamic Republic post, or you're banned from using social media. And so that should be really an attestament to why the Islamic Republic views social media as a national security threat.
That's so fascinating, Holly, to hear you say that sometimes in some of these sentencings, what happens is they ask them to go back and post regime posts, which what do? It's not just your life, it's your family's life. It's far more interconnected, and it's not an easy decision to make. I'd like to bring on Marjan. Marjan, I know all the three of you, I believe, have one eye to what's happening in Georgetown. So if anything happens, please jump in. If you guys see a moment or something you want to tell us, it's very helpful. But Marjan, I want to ask you a little bit. I was in the Middle East in 2009, and I'm sure, as you know, a beautiful young girl named Neda, who was horribly shot in the streets. And I thought, watching this, oh my God, this is going to be the moment. This is going to be it. How does a moment turn into a movement? And do you think something greater will happen? Because I think so many Iranians have been waiting for that moment since more than just 2009, but give me a sense of what you're seeing. We see women hugely involved, but it is far more than just the women.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to all of you, especially on an important day such as today, which not only marks the 44th anniversary of one of the most catastrophic days in Iranian history, which is the anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, but also on a day when symbolically we are seeing the convergence of symbolic leaders and influencers of the voices of Iranian people come together, despite their differences, despite their unique qualities and talents and skills. They're coming together because they have one singular objective. And that singular objective is the elimination of the Islamic Republic, started 44 years ago, for the purposes of giving hope and giving a better life and giving a better opportunity to the people of Iran. One of the interesting revelations that was recently announced by Gaman Institute, which is a research institute based in the Netherlands, they did an attitude survey of the Iranian people regarding the recent spate of protests. This survey was conducted in December. And the findings were just released, just about a week ago. And the Iranian people, at least the ones inside Iran, 80% of them expressed that they do not want this regime anymore, that they have finally decided that this is not where they want to stay anymore. This is not a representative government that they believe in anymore, and they want to move beyond this current regime. Again, surreptitiously, with respect to today's events, 85% of those who are against this regime are pleading for a unity council of Iranian representatives who can symbolically bring the different voices of Iranian people together in order to remove this regime and arrive at a later day. So can something bigger happen? Yes, absolutely. I think we have definitely come a long way from the 2009 revolution or 2009 protests around the conflict, the election that was being disputed between Mir Hossein Mousavi and Ahmadinejad. And the hardliners wanted to put Ahmadinejad in power, whereas the people who at the time believed in a reform movement, they believed that the so-called green candidate, Mir Hossein Mousavi, would be a right representative for them. And they put their hope in him. And of course, we know that after all these years, Mir Hossein Mousavi and his wife were under house arrest in their homes. But again, like 5 days ago, Mir Hossein Mousavi himself comes out and says, the hope for reform is gone, and this regime is corrupt to its core, and we need to have an alternative solution. Each one of these events, from the type of protest that have been demonstrated in the streets, the people who are protesting, the ages getting younger, the predominance of women in the protest, to the unity across the different ethnicities and languages spoken of the protesters in the country. We are seeing really seismic shifts, no pun intended. We are seeing some significant changes, and with 80% of the population being against the regime, I think this is as big as it can get, and it will only get bigger because momentum is building every day. And this movement is supported by the diaspora leaders and by the diaspora activists, little people like me and others. And we will continue to make sure that their voices will be heard and that they will be supported. Because there is no going back after this moment. There is no way to go back to anything like business as usual after this moment. I'll pause here.
That's great, Marjan. Thank you very much. Dr. Ladan, I want to go back to you. Marjan made so many great points that about this current moment, but from a historical standpoint, what do you believe this moment is different? We heard some of the speakers in Georgetown today say that there's concern that the momentum might be waning. Do you have that sense? How is this moment different?
No, I think this moment is the outcome of a 20 or 3 decades evolution of people's mind and thinking. You referred, and my co-panelist referred to 2009 and the time that Neda was killed. Many of the people who went there, voted for Mousavi, didn't really believe in them, but they thought that they had to find a way to coexist with the better part of the Islamic regime. And for me, the 2009 demonstration and protest with millions outside asking, where is my vote, was the last conversation the Iranian society had with the regime. From then on, because there was no vote. There is no vote in the Islamic Republic, really, because all the candidates are pre-selected. It's not election; it's kind of selections, and the people are conveyed to the vote to vote only to disqualify themselves and renounce their sovereignty by saying, okay, I'm voting for someone that has been chosen for me. After that, I think the society's cultural and intellectual evolution started to speed up against the Islamic regime. And in 2017, when ordinary people in the streets started to shout, reformist, conservative, this game is over, these people from the bottom of the streets gave strength and intellectual leadership to the activists who were trying to, to negotiate with the regime, to give in on some of their rights and to try to get some other rights. And it's after 2017 when we saw different notables of the opposition inside the country issuing statements asking for a referendum for the change of regime and a secular regime. So what we see today, in 2017, at the same time as we had this popular uprising, in parallel, we had this young woman, the daughter of the Revolution Street, who went on this utility box, took off her veil. But these contents were in parallel. They hadn't merged together. And the next to them, there was the uprising or the revolt or rebellion of the Iranian Sufis, who were very angry at the regime because the regime had put their leader in house arrest. So you saw different segments with different cultural backgrounds of the society being angry against the regime and radically protesting. What happened around Mahsa's murder was that all these different elements of the social discontent merged to one movement with the slogan "Life, Women, Life, Freedom" that was invented by the Iranian Kurdish minority and taken by the whole nation. So what we see is the outcome of a long-term process, and the important, I think, another important difference is that democratic countries and population around the world have taken up the cause of the Iranians. So the Iranians feel much less isolated now in their fight for secular democracy, whereas in 2019 or 2017, experts, quote-unquote experts on Iran, keep saying to the world that these are not political, these are social discontent, it's economic, people are attached to the revolution, to their regime. And this, of course, the impact of this perception of the rest of the world was a demobilizing impact within the society. Whereas now that Iranians have clarified their point by, the song Baraye, which is a sort of manifest of this revolution, and the slogan "Women, Life, Freedom," and the fact that women burn their scarves in public squares, clarified what Iranian wants for the whole world. And the world felt really solidarity. And this in turn strengthened the dynamic inside the country. That's why I'm saying it's so important. There is a sort of a tight correlation between how the world sees a reality and how this view of the reality shape and dynamize this reality within the country. So I think, historically speaking, if you talk to me, I have been working on monitoring and defending human rights literally for 43 years. And if Iranians were given the possibility of voting freely, without fear, without execution, without terror, I think in the early 1980s, they would have voted these people out. But unfortunately, that was not the case. Now you see how much this process that has been ongoing, and I don't know, it was Marjan who referred to Gaman survey about more than 80% of the population being against the regime inside 85%, I think, inside the country, and 90% among the diaspora. We had with Gaman a survey on Iranians' religious leaning. And one of the most profound and important indicators of where the Iranian society is heading is that many Iranians are changing their religion. Many are turning to Sufism, which is a very kind of non-literal version of Islam, or for the Christianity or Zoroastrianism, so much so that when we did our survey with more than 50,000 participants, Iran did not have a clear majority with one religion. You have something like 8% of the population that claims to be atheist or agnostic, or to tell you that the cultural fabric of the Iranian society has changed, and this is a crucial turning point in the history of the Middle East. So I would say historically what we see now is the outcome of a very long 3 decades process and cultural changes within Iran.
Ladan, amazing context that you gave us there. I want to come back to you a little bit. We're going to talk about what's next and what your feeling is. But before I go on to Holly, I want to ask her about the social media movement, and particularly Generation Z and X. Ladan, are you hopeful? It's been 42 years. You and Marjan have laid out the statistics. You know, what we have surveyed and seen. It is clear change is desired. But are you optimistic that there really will be change?
I am absolutely optimistic. One of the reasons is that, since 2017, the regime's intelligence are trying to analyze and find a way to counter these massive process and the way that their ideology is not prevalent within the minds of people, and not even by fear, because for a very long time people were against the Islamic Republic, but they thought they couldn't do anything. If you read their articles, they don't have any solution for it. They are at an impasse. So violence is the only response they have. And today, in the last 2 days, many people have been released. And I think this is also an important indicator that within the regime, there is a lot of doubts, and there is a pressure to alleviate the state violence. As you saw, one of the important things that happened, and that is the role of international solidarity, when high-profile politicians or celebrities started to sponsor prisoners and those who were on death row. Well, they succeeded in stopping the executions, which is very important. And now many of the people who have been arrested have been released, and we will see. And women who came out, remember, last night, women who were released, women rights activists, they took a picture of themselves by the prison without veil. So this is where we stand, and the regime is really, I think, at an impasse right now. I'm very optimistic.
That's remarkable, Ladan. Really remarkable to hear you say that and explain to us. These are things that we really wouldn't have seen, I think, even a year ago. Am I correct?
Yes.
That's remarkable. Holly, I want to bring you in because, I spoke to a group of Generation Zers, and the one news story they wanted to talk to me about was Iran. And it's a group of high school girls. And I was like, why are you guys so interested in this story? They say, we see it on TikTok, we see it on social media. This is so wrong that they've been living in these conditions. And I could not get over how motivated they were to learn more. What are you seeing? I know there was a report out in January looking into social media and the relevance of this movement. Tell us a little bit give us a little window about the social media strategy here.
It doesn't surprise me one bit that American Gen Z is interested in Iranian Gen Z, because it happens the other way around as well. One thing that I have to hit home about Gen Z in general is that this is a truly globalized generation because of information and communications technology. So if you have internet and social media, you're all doing the same thing. Your interests and preferences are typically the same thing. So whatever shows that middle-class American kids watching, it's very likely that Iranian kid with access to internet and a middle-class life is doing the same thing. And I think you could best look at it with the instance of Serena Esmailzadeh, who was beaten to death by security forces with batons. I myself shared a very beautiful but equally devastating video compilation. She was actually a vlogger, I believe, in the city of Karaj, which is next to Tehran, and she was talking about what it was like to be a young teenager in Iran, and her hopes and wants were very much the same as anybody else in the world. And when you looked at her and the way she dressed, even in her hairstyle, she very much embodied what a Gen Zer looks like in America or in Canada or in Europe. And so that is definitely a trend you're seeing. And I want to talk a little bit more about Iranian Gen Z, is that, this is actually, as I said, the first generation that's born with information and communications technology at their fingertips. When I was growing up in Tehran as a teenager, satellite dishes were just becoming a thing. But now everyone has a satellite dish, albeit being illegal. And over, I believe, 56% of 56 million people have access to internet. We are seeing 84% are using social media and messaging apps, 84% over the age of 18. So they're very tech savvy. And again, I should add with the hurdle that the internet's highly censored and they have to use VPNs. But just going back on the conversation about the struggle the regime is having with honing in supporters, and especially this new generation of youth, they've really, really been struggling. We saw in the 2017 presidential election, the current hardline president, we don't use the word hardline or reformist essentially these days, but just for context and color, the Raisi, who's now the current president in Iran, was running against the incumbent Hassan Rouhani, and you would not see a very conservative Iranian cleric sit next to a rapper, an underground rapper at that, with his arms tattooed. And there was just such an odd photo of this meeting, but it was essentially to bring interest of the youth into the election. And we've seen the clerical establishment try to rein in the new generation in various means. We've seen them in May this year. There was a song called Salam Farmande, or Salute Commander, that swept the country. It was actually a pro-regime song that pledges allegiance to the supreme leader. And it was essentially seen as an attempt to indoctrinate children and show their unquestionable loyalty to the IRI. And what was really I think what really shocked people was that, yes, this song was being forced that people were being forced to learn its lyrics, to sing it at schools. But guess what Iranian Gen Z was doing? They were making spoof videos of it. They were making fun of it. They were dancing to it like they're at and it just was a real attestament to the struggles that the clerical establishment has in reigning in this generation. And I think if some of you who've been watching the protests very closely, I mean, shocking images, things that I never saw of Iranian girls, not forget just taking off their headscarves or burning them, but flipping the bird at pictures of the supreme leader in their schools, or jumping on the pictures. And when I say flipping the bird, I have to note that that's a very Western thing to do, to give the middle finger. In Iran, the equivalent of the middle finger is actually the thumb. So that should just tell you how in tune they are with our pop culture, that they're giving the middle finger instead of giving the thumb. And so what we're really seeing here, and what I'm trying to hit home about, is that Iranian youth have the same needs or wants, and the situation that they're living in, they're growing up in a country where they have little to nothing in common with this geriatric clerical establishment that's ruling over their lives. They don't want to live in this Islamic Republic, and they've left them with no choice but to do one or two things. Either become part of the brain drain that's been happening for the past 4 decades and leave the country because there's no hope. There was actually there's right now an NPR journalist in Iran right now, and one of the saddest things, I'm just going to read that really quick, if I could just find it, but essentially, this young Iranian said in perfect English, "It's so hard to live in Iran, really. Believe me, it's so hard." And the journalist asks, "Do you feel like you have a future?" And this young Iranian responds, "No, I hope I will die. It's so bizarre from living in here. You can't do anything." And so this is what the youth have to deal with. For a young Iranian to say, "I don't feel like living," that's a really hard thing to deal with. So there's either they leave the country, as I said, or they rise up and get rid of this regime. And right now, yes, the protests have quieted down, but it's only a matter of time before they kick right up again, and that same generation of youth will be leading it.
Holly, that is so profound. One of the things that I've been watching is the defiance of Generation Z that we've seen. You know, there have been sacrifices. I don't want to give off the hint that there have been any generations previously that haven't sacrificed, but the blatant willingness to risk their lives of this generation has really surprised me.
Yes, and I think it shouldn't, though, because, you know, when you have nothing to live for, when you have people straight up saying that they don't want to live, you're going to sacrifice yourself. You're going to sacrifice yourself because you want to have a better future, and it devastates me. I feel so privileged with I'm living here in the United States. I lived in Iran with an American passport. I lived with Western privilege, and you know, it hurts me as an Iranian American to hear that these young Iranians are literally saying they want to commit suicide because they don't want the life that they're living. They want change in their country. And, you know, there was also another incident where there was, I'm blanking on her name right now. Her name was Roya, I believe. Roya's mother, Ladan, you chime in because I'm blanking on her name.
Minu
Majidi. Minu Majidi. So Roya lost her mother in the protests. Her mother went out to the protests because, and I think the last thing she said was because she wanted the youth to have a future. And she said if she died doing it, so be it. And maybe some of you have seen this picture of Roya with her head shaved, standing in front of her mother's grave, holding her hair. And I think that image is so powerful, but it just demonstrates like that people are willing to sacrifice everything and all. And when you, and just another thing, you know, we've had over 70 children killed, children under the age of 18 killed. Some of them were so young. They were 16, 15. These were kids that knew if they go out, they're going to get shot. They're going to be beaten to death. And they knew this full well and still went out and sacrificed their lives. And it's really telling of how dire things are and why people are willing to sacrifice their lives, because hope springs eternal. They want change in their country. And I think us working in this field on Iran, and whether you're a journalist or an analyst, you should be paying attention to the story and giving it more attention, because these people are patient. They're going to do what they can to make this happen. It's us that needs to be patient. We're not patient because we're waiting for the next big thing to happen, whether it's another incident in another war or another big news story. But we have to remember what is happening in Iran is a very long process. This isn't a months-long issue. This is something that might take years. And when you look at even the revolution itself that happened in 1970, that itself was a 2-year process. So anybody that's expecting things to happen overnight, I think we really need to be patient here.
Patience, such a good point. Marjan, I want to bring you in here. It's very clear based on just alone what Holly and...
Can I jump in, Renee?
Sorry, who's this? Hello?
Reena, can I jump in?
Oh, Marjan, yes, please, go ahead.
I don't know if Reena is here. Let me just add to what Holly said in terms of In terms of the length of this revolution, and yes, it is going to take a while, but I think that we need to recognize the death toll that each day is going to take as this revolution is taking place. And just because it may be a long run, maybe because it's going to be a longer process than an overnight overhaul of things, I think we need to be mindful of the lives that are at risk and do our best to advocate for the safety and security of the protesters and the ones who are in jail. And yes, some people were released in the past few days, most likely because of the international pressure that was imposed on the Iranian regime. But just because there are moments of progress, that doesn't mean that we on the outside who have access to open platforms should be quiet about what is happening, and we should do everything in our abilities to continue to advocate for them and reflect their voices. Holly said something about the teenagers, the Gen X and Gen Z individuals who are really at the engine of this movement, and the sense of despair that has dominated the country. It is interesting to note, and it's very sad that according to the report, the statistics that are available, and again, we have to take every statistic that comes out of Iran with a grain of salt, because the reality is much more dire than the actual than the reports that they're letting out. But there is at least 15 people in Iran are committing suicide on a daily basis. And many of the suicides are for young people between ages of 15 and 35. These are people who were born well after the revolution, and they are supposed to be the product of this regime. They're supposed to be the ones who have supposedly drank the Kool-Aid of the regime and absorbed all of their propaganda. But one of the reasons why I believe that this regime is not going to hold is because their products, the generation that they have cultivated, they are turning against it. They are not willing to be a part of it, and they want out of this repressive regime, even if it means that they have to commit suicide. We saw that a lot of young people participated in these demonstrations, even though the toll was tremendous for them. The level of brutality that they experienced during the repression, during the crackdown in the streets, the intentional shooting of the eyes, the intentionally shooting of the breast and the genitalia of the women. This was not a typical this is not your ordinary, even though there is no such thing as an ordinary police crackdown of civilians. But this is, by any measure, more violent and more cruel than anything that you have seen. This is at the level of Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. And,
Marjan,
visually and also in terms of the stories that are coming out. This is really a dystopia that is living and breathing in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Marjan, can you hear me? Marjan?
The people who are risking their lives, they are incredibly brave, and they're keeping this fight. But we cannot underestimate the value, the importance of life. And if there's anything we can do to save any single life, we should do it. And while I made a reference to an earthquake before, and both with the earthquake that happened in Qahwa, about 2 weeks ago in Iran, and the level of devastation that it has brought forward, and also the earthquake that happened in northern Syria and Turkey, we have to also recognize, especially for the northern Syria, Turkey casualties and people who are suffering the most. These are the people who have already suffered from the Islamic Republic's brutality in the Syria, within the Syrian border, as they supported the Assad regime, and they are being victimized again because now they don't have the infrastructural support to protect them. But yes, the Iranian regime is brutal against their own citizens, and they are brutal against citizens of other countries. No religion matters to them. It doesn't matter if you're Shia, Sunni, Jew or non-Jew, Jew or Christian or Baha'i. The Iranian regime is repressive and non-discriminatory, cruel and violent.
Marjan, thank you so much. I'm not sure you can hear me. You may want to sort of close out and come back in again. But thank you for that perspective and giving this that sense to us on the ground. Ladan and Holly, I want to also go to you. I know we've got probably about 6 or 7 minutes left in this talk, but I want to get a sense at this moment. Ladan, I'll start with you, then I'll go to Holly. What do you think the outside world, including the White House and, the West, what can they do in a moment like this? We know too much Western intervention isn't good. You have laid out the case on the ground just based on the statistics and sampling of how people want change. But Ladan, in having the historical context that you do of understanding what Western involvement has sometimes done in Iran, what is the best course of action in this moment to support the will of the Iranian people?
I think, thank you for coming to that, because this is really important. And some of the Western statesmen have understood the importance of what is happening in Iran, not only for Iran, but for the whole world. And I think that was the reason why President Macron met with the delegation, and that's why right now Masih Alinejad and the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi have been invited to Munich Security Conference instead of the Iranian, the Islamic Republic representatives. And this is really important that the White House or American policymakers understand that, first of all, the Islamic Republic from day one declared itself the enemy of the United States. And this I can tell you because I have been working on the archives for many years. This was not because of the 1953 coup, because Khomeini was a supporter of the 1953 coup. And Ayatollah Khomeini had the leaders of pro-Mossadegh movement executed and killed and assassinated, including my own father. No, this is because America represents liberal democracy. So the Islamic Republic has always declared openly and candidly its enmity with what America represents, with liberal democracy. And sometimes the Ayatollah Khamenei talks about it, and he says, for instance, Muslim reformers who want to change the understanding and interpretation of Islam and advocate for secular democracy, Ayatollah Khamenei called them, this is American Islam. And when he wants to explain what American Islam says, he says it's the Islam that promotes principles that have been promoted by George Washington and his acolytes. So it's not 1952. It's an ideological warfare that is also a military warfare that has, claimed so many victims in Lebanon, in Iraq, everywhere, against liberal democracy. So the least we could expect right now that Iranians within the country are claiming loudly their democratic demands and they want a secular regime based on human rights is that these democratic states understand that Iranian society is their allies and they have to support it. And this support is the way they started to do it by first acknowledging the legitimacy of the Iranian society's demands, then trying to put pressure, not, cut the financial income of the Revolutionary Guards, put maximum pressure on the Revolutionary Guards. And as they put more and more pressure, and I'm not talking military pressure, please, let's be clear about that, more and more ideological, economic pressure, financial pressure on this regime, you will see that the defections will multiply. And just note that the Mousavi, who was Prime Minister of Ayatollah Khomeini and who always was promoting the Islamic Republic's constitution, has come out in favor of women life freedom revolution and is demanding a change, a referendum for a change of regime. So the cracks within the regimes are widening and pressuring financially, and also naming and shaming and supporting and showing solidarity with the victims, and sponsoring the victims. And as Marjan mentioned, lives are important and they should be counted, and people should celebrate them and support political prisoner. There is a variety of actions that these states, men and policymakers could take, could undertake, as well as the society. I think the solidarity of artists, students, and all of these civil society organizations around the world is also crucial to maintain this dynamic and help it succeed. My point is that when America is pretty silent, I must say, about what's happening inside Iran, the first positive sign I saw was when the First Lady was the person who announced the Grammy Award for Baraye, for the song Baraye. I thought that, I know that the Iranian regime is very, very sensitive to these symbolic actions, because these are sort of in the psychological warfare that is ongoing between the Iranian state and Iranian society. These are important ammunition that are weakening the morale of those inside the country and strengthening the morale of those who are fighting this regime. So we should continue this, but especially real serious financial pressure on the Revolutionary Guards. That's very important. That should be done.
Ladan, what a great point about that Grammy moment and the sort of the subtlety that you really laid out that most people might not have been aware of. That's just brilliant. I want to go to...
Sorry, just let me tell you that the Iranian regime was very much aware of this subtlety. They noted it and they didn't like it.
Wow. And what was their reaction? Did you see? Is there anything you could tell after that moment?
Yeah, you see, for instance, because Shervin Hajipur is under the control of the regime,
yeah.
And what he said kind of was what the regime told him to say, and said, well, it's a pity that it was the First Lady who gave this prize. And I immediately noted, okay,
wow.
They have not been happy about this. That's very important.
I love that,
yes.
Ladan. What a subtlety that spoke in volumes. The Grammy moment that people may have missed. Thank you, Ladan. I want to turn to Holly. Holly, I want you to let us know where we can find your incredible newsletter, how we can subscribe, what we can see. But I also want to get sort of a final thought from you about what you were watching, particularly in the social media movement, which has really been the lifeblood for us in the West to sort of gauge what is happening.
I just want to piggyback on what Ladan was saying, and just to hit home on why it was so obvious that Shervin Hajipur was under pressure. So when the announcement happened that he had won the Grammy, he had tweeted out, "We won," and he had also posted it on his Instagram account. And there was also a viral video of him celebrating the moment it was announced. And just days later, on February 7th, he actually had posted a statement on Twitter, and I should note, with an Islamic Republic flag in it. And he had said that the livelihood of the people of Iran and the region had been destroyed by the same government whose first lady awarded it to me. So I think that really, that the way it was phrased and the fact that there was a flag there, and given that he is actually out on bail and still could potentially go back to prison, really gave that sense that this was a high possibility, like I would say 99%, that he was forced to put that statement out there. And actually, funny enough, you brought up my newsletter, and I actually did talk about this in this week's newsletter. And you can sign up at theiranist.com. It comes out every Friday. It's brought to you by my think tank, the Atlantic Council. But I think the one last thing about social media, people are saying, well, there's not numbers in the streets and there's not a lot of people out protesting. Well, actually, the protest evolves in many ways. And I'm just going to give one example that recently happened in January. So on the death anniversary of Qasem Soleimani on January 3rd, Iranians actually decided they were going to make cutlet, as we say in English, which is a meat patty dish. And the running joke with Iranian social media users, including Gen Z, is that Qasem Soleimani, when he was hit by a drone strike, he was turned into mincemeat. And so Iranians decided they were going to make mincemeat that day, and they were going to post it on social media. And they actually, Instagram chef actually had posted a video about how to make this dish, and he got arrested for a few days, just to show you how insecure the clerical establishment is about this issue. And we've also seen hashtags, not just online, but actually people writing "Happy Cutlet Anniversary Day Qasem" in graffiti on walls and posters, and people throwing paint on Qasem Soleimani, red paint that is, on Qasem Soleimani posters, or even murals of him and statues. And so this protest is alive and well. It's evolving in different ways. Just today, the anniversary, with the anniversary of the Islamic Republic, you're having people chant "Death to the Dictator" and "Freedom, freedom, freedom" from their rooftops, from their windows. And I think you're going to keep seeing this for the near future. And as I've said earlier, it's not going to be a long time before you see people are out in the streets again, because protests have been normalized. They've been normalized since December 2017 and January 2018, where we saw the biggest protest since the 1979 revolution at the time. And I think here, continuity is key. And what really stands out is the fact there's been continuity since Mahsa Jina Amini was murdered. And you're seeing protests day in and day out. And I want people to know and recognize that you shouldn't underestimate the people of Iran. Thank you.
Holly, that's great. I want to turn to Marjan. Marjan, we've only got a couple minutes left, but I'd love to have your closing thoughts. What are you watching? What are you most hopeful for? And anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, I think that definitely this movement is an evolutionary movement, and it's going to, all the protests are not one size fit all. We should not expect people to just keep coming to the streets in order to show their dissatisfaction with the regime. There are also many economic boycotts of the revolution that are of the Iranian regime that are taking place within the country, strikes. There are, just on the eve of just last night, people had sent videos of themselves setting pictures of Khamenei and Raisi on fire, writing slogans on walls. These movements are going to continue, and it is important for us to pay attention to the subtleties with which they are expressed and exhibited. not everyone is going to come to the streets. It's an unfair expectation for us to require that in order to define it specifically as a protest. The other thing I'm paying attention to is that with the release of some of these prisoners, we're going to hear more and more reports of atrocities committed in the Iranian prisons as these individuals open up and talk about what they have experienced or witnessed. There are two stories about two young women, and these were not arrested, these girls, but they had reports of rape while they were detained by Revolutionary Guard members, and there are going to be more of these accounts. And speaking out, making a report, talking about an experience, these are all also forms of protest, because the file, the dossier, criminal dossier of the Iranian regime will just get more and more complete. And there is no denying in that this regime has been committing crimes against its own citizens. And with every day that passes, the documentation and evidence against them is more prevalent. And one day, hopefully, there will be an opportunity to seek justice.
Marjan, I want to thank you. I want to thank Ladan, and I want to thank Holly. This was such a fascinating and deep discussion on exactly where we are in this moment. I want to thank all of you for joining us in this conversation. We're planning on doing more Twitter Spaces and programming from the Iran Strategy Project. And, let us know your thoughts and what you guys would also like to discuss. Please do follow the Iran Strategy Project on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. It's at AC Atlantic Council Mideast, at AC Mideast, and also AC Iran Source. That's the other handle, AC Iran Source. We use the hashtag AC Iran. And be sure to subscribe to Holly's great newsletter. Holly, I hope you can tweet that out, so if people go to your profile, they'll be able to find it easily. Thank you, guys. This was such a great, hopefully, start of many more to come. And thank you all for the work you're doing in keeping us educated and on top of the issues. We'll see you soon. And our thanks to the Atlantic Council of Middle East group here for all your great work in helping us understand this as well. We'll see you guys soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.